Welcome to the B3 Guidelines Agency Contact training. In this training, we'll describe the role and responsibilities of the agency contact for projects using Minnesota's B3 guidelines. We'll walk through how to fulfill these responsibilities by demonstrating how to navigate the B3 Guidelines tracking tool, walking through the phased review process, and describing the appropriate use of variances and non-compliant designations within the program. This information can also be found in our detailed guidance documents at the URL shown here. Let's begin by talking about who the agency contact is, what role they fulfill, and why they are an important part of the B3 process. Any agency, state entity, or non-state organization that receives general obligation bond funding for a construction project from the state of Minnesota must ensure project adherence to the B3 guidelines. The entity ensures that the project team has sufficient resources to comply with the B3 guidelines and selects an agency contact as a representative to assist with the successful submission of project documentation. This documentation is critical as it provides a record of project compliance with funding requirements and is used to analyze progress across the state and inform ongoing program development. An agency contact has three primary responsibilities. These are completing guideline documentation, phased review and approval, and variance review. Typically, the agency contact is a staff member of the agency or entity that has received bond funding for the construction project, ideally with prior experience with these types of projects. The agency contact must also understand the intent of the B3 guidelines, either from prior experience or through educating themselves over the course of the project. If the agency or entity in question doesn't have sufficient in-house resources to serve this role, please contact the B3 Guidelines administrators to discuss alternate solutions. Now let's dig into how an agency contact performs their responsibilities, starting with a demonstration of how to use the online tracking platform. Compliance with the B3 guidelines is documented within the B3 Guidelines tracking tool. This platform enables project team members to submit documentation for each guideline at each phase, from pre-design through 10 years of building operation. Access to project information is available to project team members, as defined in the tool by the project's guideline leader, as well as the B3 Guidelines administrators. When you log into the tracking tool, you'll see a list of all B3 projects you're a part of. For example, this team member is a member of one project. In addition to the project's name and address, this view shows the project's current phase within the tracking tool and which guideline version the project is using. It also calls out any immediate action items that are preventing the project from meeting its documentation requirements. Several links are also provided. The first link accesses the project dashboard, where detailed project information is tracked. Other options include adding or assigning team members or accessing the current phase report. These last two options can also be accessed from the project dashboard. The project dashboard is the main resource for your project and is where all guideline documentation is stored. The row of buttons at the top open the project editor, which includes information about team members, roles, assigned action items, and other project details. The rows of the dashboard include all the applicable guidelines for the project. These are divided into the 5 categories of performance management, site and water, energy and atmosphere, indoor environmental quality, and materials and waste. Each category can be expanded or collapsed using the plus/minus symbol. Each row represents an individual guideline, with a link to read the guideline that accesses the complete guideline language, information about the intent of the guideline, submittal requirements, and additional resources, including templates and worksheets. Each guideline can be expanded to show its component parts, including the team member who is responsible for documentation and whether that part is required or optional. Optional parts of guidelines can be listed as pursued or not pursued based on design team inputs. You can use the drop-down on the left to expand the grid to show all of your action items, all action items, or all guidelines. The columns of the grid show each phase: pre-design, design, final design, and closeout. Clicking on the phase summary report accesses a report showing all information submitted for that phase. As seen in the legend, a red outline shows when documentation is required for each guideline. The current phase is highlighted in yellow, and boxes with a yellow triangle and exclamation point are items that have been assigned to you to complete. To access and complete your assigned guideline, click on that action item icon. This opens a pop-up where you can provide your documentation. Boxes that are colored yellow are required fields during the current project phase. Boxes that are blue are calculated fields. These boxes are not directly editable, but rather are calculated from other user inputs. These fields may use data that's entered into other guidelines, potentially by other team members. To learn about how each field calculates its values, you can hover over the question mark located next to the input box. Gray boxes are fields that are not applicable during the current phase, but are required in a different one. Again, to learn more about when it is required, you can hover over the associated question mark. Once the necessary inputs have been provided, it's time to check for compliance by clicking on the green Check for Compliance button on the bottom of the input menu. If the inputs provided are compliant, you can choose whether or not to sign off on the guideline using the checkbox at the bottom of the window. If you know you need to double check an input, you can save and close without signing off on your submission. This will continue to appear as an action item on the project dashboard, but your work will be saved. If you are ready to finalize your submission, you can sign off on it. This will cause it to show as complete on the project dashboard for that phase. If an unexpected design change affects the inputs, you'll still be able to edit them after acknowledging the warning. You can then re-sign off with the current date. Completed guidelines can continue to be edited up until all guidelines are complete for that phase and it is locked for editing. Sometimes the inputs you have provided may be flagged as not compliant. The reason why a guideline is not compliant will be shown near the top of the window in a red box. In this case, you and the project team should work together to fix the problem. For example, this non-compliant will be solved when more of the budget is set aside for SB 2030 compliance and operation. To fix the problem later, click the green Save and Close button. Note that this will not sign off on the guideline. It simply saves your work so you can go back and fix it later. If the program requires a variance to solve or must be labeled as not compliant, click the red link labeled Apply for a Variance /non-compliant. More information about the role of variances and non-compliant designations are available on the B3 website. A couple other notes about the tracking tool. It is possible to open any guideline at any phase by clicking on the relevant box, though you will get a notice for guidelines that are not required at that phase, guidelines in a future phase, and guidelines that are not assigned to you. However, you can complete and sign off on guidelines in future phases. For example, if the B3 documentation is lagging behind the actual project schedule. You can also complete and/or sign off on guidelines that are not assigned to you after acknowledging the warning at the top. Your name will be used for the signature. If responsibility for the guideline should be permanently assigned to you, this can be done through the project editor, the row of buttons at the top of the project dashboard. Now let's talk about the phase review and approval process, which is performed by the guideline leader and the agency contact. Phase review is a step that helps ensure all of the information provided during the current phase is complete and accurate. During phase review, the project's guideline leader and agency contact will review the submitted information via the phase summary report. This step helps identify potential issues before it's too late in the design process to change them. Phase review begins automatically once all of the guidelines in a phase have been completed and signed off on. When this happens, the phase is locked and cannot be edited. The project's guideline leader provides the first round of review to confirm that to the best of their knowledge, the information submitted is complete and accurate. This review is followed by the B3 Guidelines administrators, who provide a limited review of specific inputs, including SB 2030 and variance requests. The agency contact provides the final review of the phase summary report, including any pending variances. They too are confirming that the information submitted is complete and accurate to the best of their knowledge, and determining whether variance requests made by the project team are deemed acceptable by the agency, state entity, or non-state organization they are representing. When a phase summary report is ready for review, an automated email will be sent from the B3 Guidelines administrators. In the project dashboard, the project status will be listed as pending approval from guideline leader or agency, and a new action item is visible for the phase summary report. Clicking on this action item will open the phase summary report. Once the report is open, the guideline leader or agency contact will review the submitted documentation for accuracy and completeness. This includes ensuring all uploaded documents meet the B3 requirements with a level of completeness that is appropriate for the current phase. If the reviewer believes any information provided is incomplete or inaccurate, they should follow up with the project team to resolve the issues. If changes are required, the current reviewer will unlock the phase for editing. This is done by clicking the bright red Unlock link at the top of the phase summary report. Questions or concerns about the acceptability of submissions can be sent to the B3 Guidelines administrators. The phase review process also includes making a determination on any pending variance requests. Guideline leaders and agency contacts should review all variance requests to ensure they meet program requirements and accurately represent project information. They should also identify opportunities to switch from full variances to provisional, a temporary measure that enables the project team to keep working toward meeting the guideline during later phases. If adjustments are needed, the guideline leader should work through them with the relevant team members. However, the guideline leader is not responsible for formally approving or rejecting variance requests. This falls to the agency contact. By approving a variance request, agency contacts are confirming that the state agency or non-state organization that they represent deems it appropriate to waive that specific guideline requirement for the project, that the request meets the eligibility conditions for the program, and that approving the variance does not compromise the project's compliance with the intent of the B3 guidelines. Variances that don't meet these three conditions should be rejected. If a variance is approved, no further action is needed. When a variance is rejected, the current project phase will automatically unlock for editing, and the project team will need to resolve the issue. This could involve adjusting the design to meet the B3 requirement, resubmitting the variance request with additional detail, or requesting a provisional variance with the goal of adjusting the design in later phases to better meet the intent of the B3 requirement. If the variance was requested for a guideline outside of the project scope, such as a site-related guideline for an interior renovation project, then the B3 Guidelines administrator should be contacted to see if it can be handled outside of the variance process. Similarly, if the agency contact is unsure or unable to determine if a variance should be accepted, please also contact the B3 Guidelines administrators for a second opinion. To finalize the decision on a variance, the agency contact will select the appropriate option in the status box on the phase summary report. When any outstanding issues have been resolved and the guideline leader or agency contact has completed their review of the phase summary report, It can be submitted using the green Submit button at the bottom of the report window. After the agency contacts review gets submitted, the project will move into the next phase in the tracking tool. For our final topic, we'll cover variances in greater detail. Variances play an important role in the B3 guidelines to address unique project constraints. The B3 guidelines differ from other rating systems in that it primarily consists of a set of required measures for all projects rather than a menu of optional sustainability strategies. Due to the variability of B3 projects, some might require adaptations to the performance thresholds and/or documentation schedule. So the B3 guidelines allow for the use of variances to provide this accommodation under certain circumstances. Two types of variances are available for project teams to use. The first is a provisional variance. Provisional variances are designed for projects that are ready to move on to the next phase, but can't currently complete all required guidelines. Provisional variances are temporary and only apply to the phase they're requested in. If the issue preventing guideline completion persists for multiple phases, the provisional variance must be re-requested at each phase. However, provisional variances cannot be requested during the last phase a guideline is required. At that time, the guideline must be completed, or a full variance or non-compliant designation must be requested. The second type of variance is a full variance. Unlike provisional variances, a full variance is permanent. Full variances can be requested for programmatic reasons when guideline requirements interfere with the intended use or program of the building or site. Full variances can also be requested due to technological limitations, when available technologies or methodologies do not enable the project to meet B3 requirements. When requesting a full variance, the project team must pursue creative solutions to meet the intent of the guideline as much as possible. Full variances should not be requested for the following reasons. They will not be considered based on budgetary or project schedule constraints, nor will they be considered for requirements missed by the project team that cannot be addressed at a later phase. Meeting the guidelines may require adjustments to the standard design and construction processes used by the project team. This is not an accepted justification for a variance. Having a small or irregular site is also not an automatic reason for a variance, although these projects may choose to follow the small buildings and/or small sites methods, which better account for the limitations of small projects. Guidelines that are recommended rather than required don't need variances. Project teams can just choose not to pursue these guidelines. And finally, variances should not be used for guidelines that are unrelated to the project scope. Instead, these should be communicated to the B3 guidelines administrators so they can be removed from the project dashboard. If the project team can't document compliance with a guideline and there's no satisfactory reason why a variance should be considered, the project will be designated as not compliant with the guideline. This designation is only available at the last phase the guideline is required. Before that, the project team should use provisional variances while attempting to solve the issue, and only pursue not compliant status as a last resort. All non-compliant designations are shown publicly on the B3 case studies database, as shown in the image on the right. Variance requests and non-compliant designations are handled within the B3 guidelines tracking tool. First, the project team submits the variance request. Next, the request is reviewed by the project's guideline leader, the B3 guidelines administrators, and the agency contact, who determines whether to approve or reject the variance request. For provisional variances, the request must clearly identify the reason the variance is required and describe next steps for complying with the guideline in later phases. A request for a full variance must identify the reason for the variance and describe how it meets one of the program's allowed justifications. It must describe how the project team exhausted reasonable alternative approaches and explored creative solutions to maintain the intent of the guideline. It must also identify a modified performance level and/or compliance method that will be pursued by the project team. For non-compliant designations, the request should describe why this designation is necessary. For any type of request, supporting documentation should be provided as needed. Here's a good example of a request for a provisional variance. The project team describes the reason the variance is needed, that they haven't been able to achieve compliance with the B3 daylight requirements during an early design stage. To meet the requirements, they need to increase daylight access. They're requesting a provisional variance so they have more time to redesign windows and other natural light features in their building, with the intent that the constructed building will meet the guideline requirements. Now let's look at a sample full variance. The reason the variance is needed is clearly stated. Due to the technological limitation of local markets in rural Minnesota, they cannot meet the required recycling rate. Next, they describe how they made every reasonable effort to meet the intent of the guideline, engaging a waste diversion consultant and exploring creative solutions like supplying gypsum board directly to a farm operator for use as a soil amendment. Lastly, they identify their modified approach and performance level, maximizing recycling rates for all waste streams with local facilities or markets through on-site sorting and regular status checks at construction meetings to achieve high diversion rates for those materials, though not meeting the overall B3 diversion requirement. Finally, let's look at some examples of unacceptable requests for full variances. The first identifies the problem but doesn't describe the specifics or propose an alternative solution. This should be rejected so that a more detailed variance request can be submitted. The second is requesting a full variance for an unacceptable reason, which is project schedule constraints. In addition, it does not describe specifics or next steps. This should also be rejected, and ideally, daylight modeling should be conducted to help the project become compliant. The third is also an unacceptable reason, in this case, a requirement missed by a project team that cannot be addressed later. This should be rejected and labeled not compliant. As always, questions about variances can be directed to the B3 Guidelines administrators. This concludes the agency contact training, where we have covered the agency contact's three main responsibilities: guideline fulfillment, phase review, and variance review. To learn more about the B3 programs and tools, please visit the website or contact the B3 program administrators. Thank you.